Okay, let's start. Hi everyone, I'm Liren Shan. Today I'll talk about our recent work on explainable K-means, planned big trees. This is a joint work with Konstantin Makryshev. So let's first start it from the classic K-means problem. So for this problem, we are given a set of endpoints in the d-dimensional Euclidean space X, and also an integer number k, which represents the number of clusters. Then we need to choose a set of k-centers in RD. And then we assign each data point to its closest center in Euclidean distance to form k clusters. Then the cost of point x is equal to the squared distance from x to its closest center C. And our goal is to find a set of k-centers to minimize the total cost over data set X. However, this clustering sometimes is hard to understand by human. For example, if we consider the point X in the middle, it's not easy to tell which center this X should be assigned to. So we need to compute all distances from X to these centers and pick the minimum distance. So in some sense, this clustering induced by centers gives a Voronoi diagram over the d-dimensional space, which usually has complicated boundaries. Then a natural question is, can we find some explainable clustering which is easy to understand by human? Dasgupta et al. They proposed to use threshold decision trees for explainable clustering. So for this threshold tree, each internal node picks a threshold cut on just a single feature or a single coordinate. In some sense, we pick a hyperplane which is parallel to axis to cut the space, and then partition the whole space into k leaves of these decision trees. And then we assign each leaf to one cluster. Then we would ask, how do we measure the quality of a decision tree? So they also propose to use K-means cost to measure the quality of the decision tree. So remember, we use decision tree to partition the whole space into D regions or into K regions. And for each region, we add a unique center for this region. And then decision tree assigns a center Tx to every point X. And the cost of this decision tree is equal to the sum of squared distance from X to its center Tx. This cost is quite similar to the classic K-means cost. So for the unconstrained cost, we take the sum over all points, their square distance to their closest center in center set C. So this is the only difference. So we restrict to a decision tree T. Then a question is how this decision tree cost compared to the unconstrained cost given by the classic K-means. Dasgupta et al. They provide an algorithm that gives a k-center set, a k-center C. They find a threshold tree T such that the cost of this decision tree T is at most order k squared times the cost given by center set C. And they define the price of expandability as the ratio between the cost of T to the optimal unconstrained cost. So in this case, if we pick k-centers with some constant approximation algorithm for classic K-means, then their algorithm basically tells us an upper bound of order k squared on price of expandability. Also, in their paper, they show an omega log k lower bound on this price of expandability, which is nice because here we can see this upper bound on the cost does not depend on the size of the data set n, and also does not depend on the dimension d. Later, 3 independent works improved this both upper bound and lower bound to order k, approximated order k. So this is also good because we know this is almost optimal. However, in practice, we usually run k-means maybe with 100 or 1,000 centers or clusters. Then order k approximation maybe not that good, especially compared to the expandable k-median. So for the k-median, from yesterday, we know k-median, the optimal is order log k, which is much better than the price, this upper bound for k-means. And Charka and Hu, they consider this expandable k-means in the low dimensional space, and they improved the upper bound for low dimensional instance. So they get k power 1 minus 2 over d. So especially when d equals to 2, they get an order log k upper bound for expandable k-means. So which is also nice, but we want to know, can we do better in general case in some other settings? Then Frost et al., they designed a greedy algorithm to expand this tree to more than.
Just a little bit to the right so that you're in the camera. A little
bit.
Oh,
okay. Sorry. Yeah. And then later, Frost et al., they designed a greedy algorithm to expand the tree to more than k leaves, because we know with exactly k leaves, we can do best we can do is order k. So we want to choose more leaves. So suppose here we have an optimal classic k-means instance and its optimal solution. Then we pick a threshold tree T with 3 leaves. So we partitioned them. Then we want to see if we pick this tree. There are 2 points. One is in the red region, and one is in the orange region, which might separated by these cuts from their closest center. So which will increase the cost for them. This one should be assigned to the red center, and this one should be assigned to the orange center. But if we can pick more leaves, so build a bigger tree. So in this case, we can add 2 more threshold cuts, one as this, one in the red region, and reassign those 2 new leaves to their best center. Then actually this decision tree with 5 leaves actually clustered all points to their closest center. In some sense, the cost of this decision tree is exactly the same as the optimal k-means. Okay, in their paper, they show that this greedy algorithm performs very well in practice. However, we showed that in the worst case, this greedy algorithm can only achieve order k square approximation. So in the worst case, it's an order k square upper bound. Then in our work, we show that given a set of k centers C and a parameter delta between 0 and 1, we can find a tree. We also provided a bipartite approximation algorithm, which can find a tree T with 1 plus delta k leaves. And the expected cost of this tree T is at most order 1 over delta times log K square times the cost given by the center set C. So in this case, if we pick delta to be a fixed constant like 0.1 and choose center C by some optimal by some constant approximation Kmeans algorithm, then our result basically says we find a tree T with 1.1 K leaves, and the cost is at most order K square to the optimal K clustering. Also, we note that in practice we usually use the elbow method to decide the number of clusters K. So which means we will pick the corner in this graph to set our K, the number of clusters. And in this case, the optimal cost for K centers is approximately the same as the optimal cost for 1 plus delta K centers. Then in this case, we actually show that we pick a threshold tree T with 1 plus delta K leaves, while the cost is at most order K squared times the optimal cost with 1 plus delta K centers, which in some sense is not the by criteria, it's exactly the approximation, but slightly cheat here at this assumption. Yeah, and also we showed that actually this bi-criteria approximation bound is near optimal. So we show some instance with K clusters, and for this instance, every threshold tree T with 1 plus delta K is at least this order log K square divided by delta times the optimal cost. Okay, till now, any questions to our results or the setting of the problem? Okay.
So how important is it that the decisions in each step are very simple, like x less than equal to some constant, or can I have tilted lines and do strange things like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, I think this question is also like mentioned yesterday by Ola. Yeah, so currently we focus on the threshold cards because it's easy and easy to understand. So for general linear hyperplane, so these arbitrary cards, we actually know very little about that, but it's a very interesting question, yeah, to think about. Okay, then next I will go to our algorithms. Yeah, our algorithm is actually quite simple. So algorithm is a divide and conquer algorithm. So our algorithm will recursively partition the whole D-dimensional space into regions. And each region, we assign some centers to this region. So initially, we assign all K centers in the input to the root of this tree T. Then we would run recursively run a subroutine called divide and share. Then in this subroutine, at every iteration, each region V will be partitioned into 2 subregions, V left and V right. Some centers are shared between these regions. So here I want to mention that for points, they are partitioned into 2 disjoint subregions. So one point will be partitioned into the region that contains this data point. However, for centers, some centers outside of the region, we might assign it to this region. So some centers might be shared by both regions, V left and V right. We will see more clear in later animations. And the whole process will stop if each region is assigned only one center. So in this case, we know this region will be assigned to that center. So our clustering process is done. Okay. Yeah, then I'll show a process how this divide and share works. So suppose this is one region in our algorithm, and all red squared points are centers assigned in this region. The first step, we compute the median of all these red centers. So here median, I means for every coordinate I, the coordinate of this black point is actually the median of the coordinate for other red centers in this coordinate. And then we move the origin to this median point. Okay. So we find the center which are farthest from this origin point. And we define this distance as a radius r. Okay, now I will choose a threshold cut randomly. So at each round, we will first uniformly sample one coordinate I from 1 to d dimensions, and then uniformly at random picks a threshold t in between 0 and r square. Then we pick the threshold cut at coordinate I with threshold square root of t. Okay, then we are not done. So we need to slightly shift this threshold cut square root of t to the left and to the right by an epsilon factor. So we will pick another two cuts, 1 minus epsilon times square root of t, and 1 plus epsilon times square root of t. Here epsilon is approximately delta over log k. Okay, so for the data points, a data point x will be assigned to either left region or red region according to this threshold cut I square root of t. However, for the centers in the shaded stripe here will be shared by both left and right regions. And outside of these shaded stripes, those centers will be assigned only to the right region if it's falling in the right region, and assigned to the left region if it's falling in the left region. So here, if we look at the left region, all points in this blue area will be assigned to left region. While for centers, we see all centers in the blue area will be assigned to this region. And also there is one center outside of this blue region. However, it's in the left of the slightly twisted cut 1 plus epsilon times square root of t is also assigned to this left region. So this point will be shared by both left region and the right region. Okay. And then our algorithm will pick the threshold cut for the left and the right region independently in the next few rounds. So it will, for example, for this left region, our algorithm will recompute the median and move the origin to the new median and randomly sample the cut, as I just said, and then create cuts and assign centers. Yeah, so any questions to our algorithm?
And what is the idea of this buffer zone? Like, why do we need it kind of?
Oh yeah, I will discuss this idea later. So I will give motivations for why this buffer zone. But this is very important for us. If we don't pick this shared buffer zone, then we will lose the order k. So basically, go to the optimal for exactly k center KDs. Okay, then I will provide some motivations for why we pick threshold cut like this. Oh yeah, so before that, I will mention like, for example, a point x close to the boundary. By this buffer zone, it will not be separated from its closest center because this center is assigned to the left region. Yeah, this answers a question. So first, I will show why we pick the threshold cut at square root of t. So remember, we first samples t from uniformly 0 to r square, and then we pick the threshold cut at square root of t. So here, suppose the origin is the median, and we have we look at one point x, and and the radius is this r, and the closest center to x is exactly at the origin. So this is a very special case for us. Then what is the probability the threshold cut we sampled separate this point x and its closest center c? Because we pick threshold cut by this square root of t, so we can easily compute this probability of a separation is equals to the square distance between x and c divided by the radius square. So r divided by r square. And if x and c are separated, x will be reassigned to centers in the right region. So in this case, will be the furthest center with penalty r square, radius square. Then combine the probability of separation and the penalty, we will get expected penalty is approximately square distance between x and c divided by dimension d. So this expected penalty is very small because we know if c is the closest center to x, this square distance is actually the cost of x in the optimal k-means solution. So which means this expected penalty, we can accept it. However, if we just pick threshold cut at t, then this probability is proportional to the L1 norm between x and c and divided by the radius. Then the penalty here, the expected penalty would be the L1 distance times the radius r. And if this radius r is very large, then we can imagine this expected penalty is very huge, which is bad for us. Okay, now I will show the most important part in our algorithm, which is this shared area. We shared some region in the shaded area. So suppose we pick one cut in dimension I, in some dimension I. What's the probability we separate center point x and its center c? Sorry. So yeah, in this case, we separate x and c if and only if xi is greater than or equal to square root of t, where ci is less than the left boundary. So 1 minus epsilon times square root of t. And then we can compute this probability. Yeah, this here we slightly go much faster. So in the last inequality, we shows that this separation probability is actually proportional to the xi minus ci square, which is very small in some sense. If we combine all coordinate I, this separation probability is proportional to the square distance between x and its center c. Yeah, and then if we separate them, the penalty is radius square. The expected penalty by combining the separation probability and the penalty is proportional to the squared distance between x and c, which is small and good for us. So till now is the motivation why we pick a threshold cut like this. Then I will turn into the analysis of our algorithm. My plan has two parts. So because our algorithm is a bi-criteria approximation algorithm, so first we need to show the number of leaves we choose by our algorithm is 1 plus delta k leaves. And second, I will upper bound our cost by approximately order log squared k. Okay. So before that, any questions? If not, I will go into the analysis. Okay, fine. Yeah. Let's first analyze the number of leaves. So first, we consider any fixed center C in the center set. There are 3 events might happen. The first event is C is in this shaded area. Next event, this center C will be duplicated because it's shared in both left and the right region. And second event, second event, this C is separated from the trunk. So here we define the trunk as the region which contains the median, which is very important for us because consider the centers for assigned to this blue region is maybe some k tilde centers. Then if we pick cut at like this, the left region which contains the median, this black point will contain at least k tilde divided by 2 centers because it's the median. So if C is separated from the trunk, then the right region contains this center has at most k tilde divided by 2 centers. So the centers will divide by 2. And third region, third event, C is not duplicated and also not separated from the trunk. So it remains in the trunk. Okay, we note that the first 2 events are most interesting for us because in the first event, the number of leaves containing C will increase by 1. So the number of duplicates will increase by 1. And also in the second case, this C is separated from the trunk. Then we know that all leaves containing this center C has centers shrink by half. So if we consider our algorithm in different levels, then if event B happens, we will go into, or if event 2 happens, we will go to the next level. So the total number of levels will bounded by log k because we have totally k centers, and each level, the number of centers will shrink by k, or shrink by a factor of 2. Then suppose we focus on one level, we might see some event 1 happens or event 3 happens, and eventually this event 2 happens, we will go to the next level. Then how many duplicates will happen in one level, or how many duplicates in the next levels? So the expected number of duplicates would be this, which is how many times event 1 happens till we see event B. So it's like a flip coin many times. Then we focus on these 2 interesting events. So first, we want to see what's the probability event 1 or event 2 happens. So in this case, if center C is in the right hand side of this orange cut, this left buffer 1 minus epsilon times square root of t, then C is either duplicated or C is separated from the trunk. This probability would proportional to 1 over 1 minus epsilon square. And then the event 2 happens only when the center C is in the right of the right buffer cut, which is 1 plus epsilon times square root of t cut. In this case, this event happens with probability proportional to 1 over 1 plus epsilon square. And we divided these two terms, which is approximately the expected number of duplicates is approximate 1 plus 4 epsilon. However, this is just for 1 levels. We have totally log k levels. So we combine these log k levels, which would be 1 plus 4 epsilon power log k, and which is upper bounded by 1 plus delta. If we pick epsilon, approximately delta over log k, and delta is some constant, some number between 0 and 1. So now we show that for any fixed center, the number of duplicates or the number of leaves containing this center is at most 1 plus delta in expectation. We have totally k leaves at the beginning of our algorithm. So combining all these centers, we have at most 1 plus delta times k leaves. So yeah, this is how we bound the total number of leaves. Okay, and finally, I will go into the cost of our clustering. So here I will only show a proof sketch of our analysis. So first, we consider any fixed point x. So here we define some notation which is slightly complicated. So we let ak be the smallest number such that for every partially built tree T prime of our algorithm, the expected final cost in our threshold tree T, given this partially built tree T prime, is at most AK times the current cost given this T prime for X. So how to think about this AK is if we think T prime as just the root of our threshold tree T, then this AK is exactly the upper bound on our approximation factor, because if T prime is a root, basically there is no condition. So the left-hand side is the expected final cost given by our algorithm. And in the right-hand side is AK times X to the closest center in all centers, which is the cost of X in the unconstrained K-means cost. So then this AK is exactly the approximation factor. However, here we consider for every partially built tree, so every middle stage of our algorithm, which is much stronger definition than the approximation factor. So AK is always an upper bound for the approximation factor. Okay. Then we only need to show that this AK is in the order of 1 over delta times log squared k. Then we are done, right? So how to show this? So suppose for this point X, C prime is the closest center to this point X in this partially built tree T prime. And for this region, we let dj be the maximum distance between centers in these regions. So this is actually the diameter. You can think of the diameter of this region. If we separate X and its current closed center C prime at some step, then we need to reassign X to some other centers in the left region in the end of our algorithm. So in this case, the penalty is upper bounded by d square, the diameter square. However, we can do actually slightly better because in this case, we know there are some other points, other centers in the left region. So we can actually first assign X to its closed center in the left region, which we call the fallback center C double prime, which is the closest, which is the cost of X after we just after we pick this card, right? And we call this distance by mj. Okay. Now I will show you two upper bounds on the final cost of X. If X and C prime are separated, then first bound is very easy. So here we just use this d square as our penalty and use the triangle inequality. We get the final cost of X is upper bounded by 2 times the distance from X to its current or original center C prime plus 2 times diameter squared. A second bound is somehow interesting because in this case, we can actually first assign X to its fallback center C double prime. However, we might separate separate this C double prime and X in later steps. But then by our definition of AK, which is a much stronger definition, which holds for every partially built tree T prime. So we know that final cost is also upper bounded by AK times this mj square. Okay, then we want to combine these two bounds. So the penalty would be the minimum over 2 bounds, which is d squared, and a minimum over 2d squared, and AK times mj square. Okay, now we note that every L equals to order d log k steps. This diameter will shrink by a factor of 2. We note that. And then there are 2 different cases. When this diameter is much larger than its distance to its fallback center, then we just use this fallback center, which is a very small penalty for us. And in this case, we can bound the first case by a good term. And if second case happens, dj is smaller than is approximately equals to mj, then we just use dj as our penalty. However, we know d will shrink fast, like every L steps, d will decrease by a factor of 2. There are not too many such steps. So at most, maybe L times something steps, totally steps in the second case. So we can upper bound second case very well also. Yeah, I will not show the detailed analysis, but combining 2 cases, we will get AK is equals to order 1 over delta times log squared k times log AK. And then which provides our desired upper bound on term AK. Then our analysis is done. Okay. So finally, I will summarize our results. So first, expandable K-means clustering is easy to understand by human. And if we choose a threshold tree T with exactly k leaves, we lose a factor of order k comparing to unconstrained K-means. However, we lose only a log squared k if we use 1 plus delta k leaves. There are also many open problems. So first, we can see this decision tree already shows some hierarchical properties. So can we build a hierarchical expandable clustering? And second two problems also appears in other papers. First, expandable clusterings by removing points. So we can remove some points to make a cluster expandable, which appears in Cyan and other authors. And the second case, third problem, which is build a shallow decision tree to cluster data, which appears in Labor et al. Their paper. And finally, can we use this idea for general like graph partitioning or general matrix space problems? Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's all.